On the hillside, the 2-meter-tall Tauren skeleton stood proudly. Heiss stared at Peggy with a malicious expression. She was different from skeleton soldiers. Peggy's bones were much better in terms of color and texture, especially the bones in her waist and legs. The entire thing had a dark gold color. This color appeared especially mysterious and powerful against the night sky. Matthew did not hesitate. One by one, he took out magic scrolls from his magical bag. Then, he tore it up without hesitation. In just a few seconds, one after another, strengthening spells were cast on the Tauren skeleton. Bear's tenacity, the strength of a wild bull, the elegance of a cat, the owl's wisdom, sword and sword protection, negative energy shield. Considering the enemy's occupation, Matthew had even spent a lot of money to give Peggy a valuable heat-resistant ring. This would grant her immunity to fire for a short period of time. Arcane halos descended. These strengthening spells pushed Peggy's combat power, which was originally just a little over Tier 3, to the peak of Tier 3. She looked like she was not to be trifled with. However, she was still not satisfied. That's it. Where is buff of Eagle Prestige? Where is the buff of the Cunning Fox? Why didn't you go all out? Matthew waved his hand. I don't have enough mana. Of course, this was a lie. In his heart, he was actually thinking, why would a skeleton like you need extra charm and intelligence checks? Let's do it. Let's end this quickly. As they spoke, Matthew began to mobilize his mental power to command the skeletons to move forward. Peggy did not continue asking. Her right hand suddenly reached for her crotch. The sound of a crack. She pulled out her dark golden thigh bone. This bone blade that was half the height of a human was her most handy weapon. Losing this thigh bone would not affect her balance and movement. But with this bone blade, her ability to deal damage would increase by several times. Phew. The bone blade tore through the air. Peggy charged forward. The followers who were originally blocking the front immediately scattered like birds and beasts. Peggy's target was obviously not these small fries. She took a step forward. The distance of more than 10 meters suddenly disappeared. Bang. The bone blade slashed at the short knife that the arsonist had pulled out in a hurry. After successfully parrying the attack, Heiss' body sank a little. The muscles in his chest trembled violently. His eyes revealed a trace of disbelief. In the next second, the short knife, which was obviously of extraordinary quality, started to twist rapidly. Heiss released his hand alertly. Then, he rolled on the ground. A whistling sound brushed past his scalp. Half of his long black hair had been shaved off. In the middle of his head, there was a gap that looked like the Mediterranean Sea. Damn skeletons. Heiss went on a berserk. He rolled continuously to avoid Peggy's pursuit. Puff. 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 3 bottles of red medicine were smashed on the ground in front of him. A wall of fire instantly formed. Matthew had sharp eyes. He saw that it was blazing glue. Don't barge in. He hurriedly reminded her. The flames of the blazing glue were especially fierce. The heat-resistant ring was immune to heat, but it might not be immune to the destructive power of the flames themselves. Peggy didn't get carried away. She calmly avoided the flames and chased after Heiss. However, Heiss was also very cunning. His movement technique was obviously trained in urban street battles. With the help of an incendiary tool, he started to deal with Peggy. The few sneak attacks of the Tauren skeleton were all resolved by him. Very quickly, there were bonfires burning around Peggy. Her space of movement was constantly being compressed. The situation was gradually reversed by Heiss. The arsonist profession is a bit of a counter for me. Matthew silently noted it down. Most arsonists were evil. He would kill any arsonist he met in the future. It was obvious that the flames were effective against the undead. It wasn't just Peggy who was affected. The skeleton soldiers instinctively avoided the places where the flames burned. Heiss had observed this. He immediately berated the remaining lackeys. What are you waiting for? Use the Molotov cocktail to break through the blockade of the bone shards and kill that necromancer. Heiss' calm command greatly encouraged his followers. They were originally in a state of chaos due to the sacks of decay and only knew how to avoid the pursuit of the skeleton soldiers, but now they also reacted. Cover me. Scarface resisted the itch and called out to his companions. That necromancer doesn't have much mana left. As long as we charge over, we can win. The remaining 3 nodded reluctantly and began to move in groups. The sound of glass bottles shattering became more intense, and the flames surged on the hillside. Fortunately, this area was barren land, so there was no way to form a more ferocious fire. But even so, the movements of the skeleton soldiers were also affected to a certain extent. Scarface used the fire to swerve left and right. Suddenly, he noticed that there was a gap in the skeleton soldiers' movements. There! Scarface shouted. He gripped his dagger tightly and charged forward. The others immediately followed. Whoosh! The night wind blew. The flame that moved sideways had helped him a lot. The gap between the skeleton soldiers became even bigger. Cover me! Scarface charged forward with all his might. The skeleton soldiers on both sides of the road came to defend. However, they were all blocked by Scarface's companion with a fearless attitude. Bang! One of the followers was hit by a skeleton soldier who walked over and hit him with a shield. His head was covered in blood. He staggered and fell. He was still full of hope as he looked at Scarface's blurry figure running away. Scarface would finish the job on their behalf. Necromancer's brand. I won't let you down. Scarface turned his head to take a look. Then, he began to accelerate. Within a few breaths, he successfully crossed the line of defense built by the skeleton soldiers. That damned necromancer. It was already right in front of him. Go to hell. Scarface grinned as he launched his final charge. However, in the next second, his eyes widened. He saw the necromancer suddenly raise his left hand that had been hidden under his robe. A thin layer of cloth slid down Matthew's arm. Under the moonlight, an exquisite crossbow appeared under the mist robe. The tip of the arrow was still glowing green. Scarface's sinister smile instantly froze. Whoosh! The arrow hit his chest. Scarface, who was sprinting, suddenly staggered. After falling, he rolled down the hill weakly. The crossbow is indeed a reliable partner for spellcasters on their path of growth. Matthew skillfully reloaded the crossbow. The performance of these arsonists exceeded his expectations. Fortunately, he had more than one trick up his sleeve. After getting rid of Scarface, the threat of the small fries disappeared. Under Matthew's command, the skeleton soldiers retreated and pushed forward step by step. The remaining 3 followers barely managed to meet up with Heiss in a panic. But Peggy had already outflanked him from behind. A solid encirclement was formed. Seeing this scene, Matthew still felt that it was not safe enough. There was actually resistance in the eyes of the enemies. It seemed like the pressure was not enough. Why don't we try the signature move of the necromancer? Matthew cleared his throat. He tried to make an evil and hoarse voice that was described in the online novels he had read before. Hee hee, looks like you want to become my servants, hee hee. The effect of this move was surprisingly good. The followers instantly thought of how their bones would be harvested after they died. The will of the followers instantly collapsed. They began to scatter and flee. However, at this moment, the rotting sacs on their bodies had already spread to their skin, and even their eyelids were covered by a thin layer of blood membrane. Because they could not see the road clearly, they could only run like headless flies, which provided great convenience for the skeleton soldiers to clean up the mess. After a while, 3 of Heiss' followers were killed one after another. At this point, the only enemy left was Heiss the arsonist. Matthew was not careless. This guy was a real third-rank adventurer and most likely an elite. Under normal circumstances, Peggy might not be able to win against him in a 1v1. He chose a more stable ending strategy. Halfway up the hill, the fire gradually died out. Heiss glared at Matthew with a bloody face. Behind him was a Tauren skeleton with a bone blade and terrifying combat strength. In front of him was a team of fully equipped skeleton soldiers. This necromancer's army was enough to take down a small town. But he used it to deal with a single arsonist and his subordinates. Heiss felt very aggrieved. He really wanted to ask this necromancer what was wrong with him. However, his rationality told him that this was meaningless. The individual quality of the skeleton soldiers is insufficient. Perhaps we can try to catch them off guard. This thought ran through Heiss' mind. But he quickly dismissed it. He looked at the crossbow in the necromancer's hand with fear. A strong sense of unwillingness appeared in his eyes. Whoosh! He scratched his extremely itchy cheek in frustration. In my current state, I can't guarantee that I can kill the enemy with a critical strike. He's lucky. He quickly took 2 steps to the side. It was right next to the almost extinguished wall of fire. Then, he took out a bottle of purple-green potion and gulped it down. Coo coo coo. Heiss drank very quickly. When there was only half left, he stopped moving. The next time we meet, I will burn your bones and scatter your ashes. He threw out a vicious sentence. Heist turned around and ran down the hill. At that moment, his speed was unbelievably fast. It actually left a long afterimage under the moonlight. Sprint potion. Peggy originally planned to interrupt the other party's action of taking the medicine. However, Heist was unbelievably fast. He was gone before she could get close to him. At this time, the afterimage quickly swept past the torn skeleton. The soul fire in Peggy's head suddenly lit up. Whoosh. The bone blade moved forward. Thrust. The sound of weapons piercing flesh rang. The huge bone blade cut deeply into Heist's shoulder blade. Good prediction. Matthew couldn't help but praise loudly. However, Heist's tenacity was far higher than he had imagined. After taking this attack head-on, he only staggered a little. Then, he continued to run without saying a word. Hey, my leg. Peggy's hand slipped, and she failed to retract her bone. Heist carried it and ran away. Arsonist had an extremely strong ability to escape. Coupled with the help of the advanced sprint potion, it would be very difficult to catch him unless an inescapable net was set up in advance. Heist was very skilled in escaping. Relying on this combination, he had already saved himself several times. He believed that this time would not be an exception. Matthew. Peggy was anxious. You chase after him first. Matthew said calmly. His gaze was locked in the direction where Heist's afterimage had gone. I will not let him escape. Matthew was ready to use his ultimate move. However, at this moment, his body suddenly trembled slightly. Immediately after, a strong desire and hatred surged into his mind. He pondered for 2 seconds. Matthew decisively chanted another spell. Near the farm, Heist slowed down. He was in a terrible state. Peggy's bone blade had almost cut him in half from the back. If it weren't for his high tenacity, he would have been a dead man. But even so, he urgently needed a place to recuperate. There's a fire here, so it's not convenient for the enemy to get close. He thought about it. Heist decisively barged into the farm. The surroundings were all burning with flames, but to him, it was like returning to his home. Arsonists had extremely high fire resistance. If he were a little careful, an ordinary fire would not pose any threat to him. We're safe for now. He was leaning against a stone house that had been burned beyond recognition. Heist rested for a while. He looked at the bone blade on his back and frowned. Just as he was thinking about how to deal with his injuries and the pursuers, a mournful roar suddenly pierced his eardrums. Heist quivered. A sharp pain came from his chest. He turned around in shock. He saw a ghost with a blurry face sticking close to him. In the next second, the specter's claw suddenly pulled out from Heist's chest. Bang. Bang. The heart that was exposed to the air was still beating vigorously. No. Heist's desperate cry was stuck in his throat. Because in an instant, his vocal cords were torn to shreds by spectral soul. You sensed a powerful resentment. Channeling the resentment, you used undead summoning. You have obtained an extremely resentful ghost, LV8. You killed the arsonist Heist and his subordinates, preventing the fire from spreading to the forest. You have received the reward Wilderness Transformation. Wilderness Transformation, you have mastered the basic skills of shapeshifters. You can transform into an animal blessed by the wilderness without casting a spell or chanting. You can choose one of the following animals as your wilderness form. Skunk. Raven. Duglin. Wasn't shapeshifting the unique skill of druids? Matthew was pleasantly surprised. This was most likely caused by the two gaming systems that were fighting against each other. In the end, Matthew chose the raven as his wilderness form. This was to make up for his shortcomings. All three animals were small beasts and did not occupy a high ecological position in the food chain, so their combat ability was very average. Skunks were more agile. In some more complicated mountains or forests, skunk transformation might help escape, but other than that, it had no other advantages. Matthew wouldn't go so far as to turn into a skunk and squeeze some musk for himself to sell. The Duglin was a small dragon that looked like a hound. However, the dragon bloodline in these small animals was even thinner than that of the kobolds. Dragon's might and spells were naturally out of the question. Duglin had a certain storage ability, and there was a natural dimensional space in its abdomen. The size of the space was linked to Duglin's level. Newborn Duglin dragon cubs had one-dimensional space, and each subsequent level would add one more dimensional space. Each dimensional space was about the size of a medium-sized pumpkin and could store many things. If he had to choose an animal companion, Matthew would choose the duckling without hesitation. But this was his own transformation. Turning himself into a mobile storage space would instead make Matthew lose his sense of security. Compared to the two animals, Raven's advantages were self-evident. It could fly. And it was very fast. It was worth it just to travel or escape, not to mention that the Raven also had excellent reconnaissance abilities. The only weakness of this animal was its low HP. Raven only had 1 HP. If you were discovered by an enemy who had the ability to deal with the air, you would easily be knocked out. How can this be so perfect? Matthew was quite satisfied with his new ability. In his impression, many powerful mages would turn into ravens. This was a good sign. He looked at the mission pane. The reward for wilderness transformation came from follow-up mission 2. Maintaining it is also very important. Other than the new ability, he also received 200 XP. The mission itself had not changed. This meant that this was a long-term and repetitive task, just like planting trees. As long as a threat appears and the defense succeeds, I can obtain a reward. Then, could I attract a threat myself? To farm the rewards. Matthew was just thinking about it. After all, he had no way of determining the system's judgment criteria. If he messed up, it would be a huge loss. In terms of personality, Matthew actually didn't like to fight and kill. He preferred to plant trees slowly and defend passively. It was enough to obtain stable happiness. Chirp, chirp. The oak tree fairies appeared. They surrounded Matthew and sang praises in a high-profile manner, praising his heroic feat of expelling the arsonists. Fairies hated skeleton soldiers. But they liked Matthew very much. This might be the effect of Matthew's extremely high affinity with nature. You have received the blessing of Fairy Princess Lulu. You have obtained a semi-permanent status, Eye of the Forest. You have obtained a semi-permanent status, Wind of the Oak Tree. Eye of the Jungle. When you are in the jungle, your vision will be greatly improved, and you will be able to see what is behind you. Wind of the Oak Tree. When you approach an oak tree, it will release the power of nature to heal your wounds and soothe your soul. Your mana recovery speed will also be greatly increased. When an oak tree fairy lives on the oak tree, the effect of the wind of the oak tree will be doubled. Fairy Princess. Matthew looked curiously into the fairies. In the end, he only saw a flickering shadow. Lulu was very shy. Matthew had only heard of her name from other fairies, but he had never seen her face. However, that night, Lulu took the initiative to show up and give Matthew a blessing. But Matthew still couldn't see her face clearly. Thank you. Matthew expressed his gratitude to the place where the white light disappeared. Eye of the Jungle and Wind of the Oak Tree were both very practical. The semi-permanent meant that as long as Fairy Princess Lulu was still alive, they would take effect. According to Matthew's deduction, Lulu should have just become a fairy princess. She was still very young. There was also a chance for her to become a more powerful and long-lived fairy queen as long as nothing happened to the oak forest. In a way, these two semi-permanent statuses were no different from permanent statuses. Matthew comforted the frightened fairies. Then, he walked down the hill. At the edge of the farm, the flames gradually died down. The skeleton soldiers dragged the bodies of the arsonist and his followers together. Peggy was wiping her bone blade. Not far away, a blue halo was floating in a daze. It was a ghost with a blank expression. Until Matthew walked over. Only then did the ghost's eyes gradually regain their luster. Matthew, you helped me. The spectral soul realized what had happened. Matthew raised his withered wooden staff, and a stream of negative energy surged into the ghost's body. The ghost's originally almost intangible spirit body regained a little luster. I'm sorry, Mr. Farmar, I couldn't come earlier. Matthew sighed softly. Farmar was the owner of this farm. He and his family should have died at the hands of those villains. Previously, Matthew had planned to chase after the arsonist. He felt an extremely powerful resentment in the direction of the farm. This resentment was actually growing stronger against the raging fire. It sensed Matthew's presence. So it begged him for a chance to take revenge. Matthew naturally wouldn't refuse. If such a powerful resentment were ignored, it would definitely give birth to a malicious ghost that would kill without blinking. He used the dead summoning to respond to the other party's plea. In the end, Farmar's spirit body was transformed into a powerful specter. Spectral soul's strength depended on his resentment. After his revenge was successful, Farmar's spirit body was greatly weakened. If there was no external interference, he was going to disappear soon. Yesterday was Anthony or Farmar's son's birthday. Our family went to town for half a day and bought a lot of things that children liked: desserts, candies, butterbread, and strawberries with frost sugar. When I went out this morning, I felt that the omen was bad. My old dog, Hunter, kept barking, but I found him noisy, so I locked him in the warehouse. I should have known that Hunter wouldn't bark for no reason. He's very intelligent. The group of people rushed in. They kidnapped Lena and Anthony and killed the others. I only had a pitchfork in my hand, and the other men were defenseless. We relied on the warehouse to resist for a while. I couldn't even buy them enough time to escape into the cellar. Damn it. Farmar rambled on. Matthew listened in silence. This was a very responsible middle-aged man. Almost all he talked about were his family, his brothers, and the farm laborers. His face was full of longing for life. However, even with Matthew injecting negative energy into him, his life as a ghost was about to come to an end. Unless. Do you want to continue existing in this form? I can help you. Farmar's condition was getting worse and worse. Matthew couldn't help but mention it. Farmar was stunned. He shook his head. No, thank you, Matthew. Thank you for your kindness, but I don't need it. Lena and the children are waiting for me. I should go with them. As he spoke, he looked towards the east. Matthew looked over thoughtfully. His vision suddenly turned gray. Outside the charred stone house, 6 or 7 souls were clustered together. They gazed lovingly at the farmer. That was his family. Matthew also saw that cute little girl. She looked dazed. It was as if she did not know what had happened. I'm leaving, Matthew. There are some of my savings in the cellar behind the mill. Please take them. Farmar's figure gradually disappeared. I only have one wish. Don't let us die without a proper burial, okay? The gray field of vision suddenly disappeared. Farmar and the other souls instantly disappeared. Matthew's temples were pounding violently. You have mastered a new ability, Elementary Spirit Vision, during your encounter and conversation with a ghost. Elementary Spirit Vision, you can see a corner of the ghost world. Remark, using this ability will consume a lot of mental energy. Phew. Matthew heaved a sigh of relief. Under normal circumstances, ghosts could only be seen by people when they turned into strong corporeal forms, such as malicious ghosts. Ordinary ghosts couldn't be seen normally. Necromancers could use the spell Spirit Body Perception to capture the traces of souls. However, Spirit Body Perception was a Tier 3 spell. Therefore, necromancers below level 8 rarely had ghosts as their summons. Farmar actually had the chance to become a powerful specter. It was just that his resentment dissipated too quickly. If Matthew was an evil necromancer, he could have forced him to sign a contract with him and not kill Heiss, or continue to lie to Farmar that Heiss was not dead. This way, he would be able to obtain a spirit with astonishing combat strength. But Matthew wouldn't do something like that. Next was to clean up the battlefield and check the spoils of war. Matthew first cast his gaze at the body of the arsonist, Heiss. He walked over. He touched it without any courtesy or dignity. You have obtained the spoils of war. 400 GP and 80 SC. Blazing Glue X3 set. Fiery Dragon Oil X2 bottle. Molotov Cocktail X1 bottle. Ring of Invisibility, unidentified. Silver Frost Brotherhood's Token X1. Secret Letter X1. Muscle Scroll X6, Tightening Scroll X10. The Dark Knight and the Order of Calamity. Cleaning up the battlefield was hard work. However, if there were rich spoils of war to take, the situation was different. Matthew grabbed a handful of gold coins and threw them into a small mud jar, then placed them into the dimensional space of the magical bag. The pleasant sound of metal rolling could be heard throughout the entire process. There is no sound more pleasant than this. The arsonist was extremely wealthy. In addition to the one he took from the cellar, Matthew had earned more than 500 gold coins overnight. In the past 3 years. Even when his financial situation was at its best, it was less than 1/10 of what it was now. This money can be used to buy a lot of green liquid. Perhaps I can consider buying a higher level catalyst tool. This meant that many more trees could be planted this spring. Other than gold coins, the wealth of items on Heiss blinded Matthew, a poor villager. Blazing glue, Molotov cocktail, fiery dragon oil, these were all good materials for arson. In a low-level encounter, these items could unleash unimaginable power. Without these items, Matthew would have flattened them long ago. Now, the remaining items were in Matthew's hands. Of course, he wouldn't use them recklessly because the undead were naturally afraid of fire. It was just that he had to be more careful when using it. It wouldn't be good if he hurt his underlings. You have used identification on the ring of invisibility, unidentified. The appraisal was successful, and your identification skill proficiency +10. Ring of Invisibility, Level 1 rare item, wear this on your index or middle finger, and you can enter an invisible state at any time. Can be used 9 times per day. Attribute, Perception +1. Remark 1-1 when in stealth mode, you cannot move, attack, or cast spells. Otherwise, the invisibility effect will disappear. Remark 2, you still have the ability to collide with the target when you are invisible. If you collide with someone else, the invisibility effect will disappear. This is more like a concealment ring. Matthew looked at the silver-white ring with a black snake pattern with great interest. This wondrous item was still far from being a true ring of invisibility. However, it could be used more often and did not require any casting actions. Perception +1 attribute upgrade is also worthy of the identity of a first-grade strange object. He polished the ring. Then, he put it on his middle finger. The rest of the things were a little lackluster. There was still half a bottle of advanced sprint potion left. He could use it for himself in the future. He did not know which city the Silver Frost Brotherhood was from, nor did he know the importance of this token. It was too troublesome to throw it in the junk pile. As for those illusion scrolls, they were even more comical. Matthew did not expect high shiny muscles to be the effect of an illusion. This guy was actually less than 1.7 meters tall. The flesh on his body was also loose. There were no signs of training at all. Perhaps he thinks that kind of appearance will help him burn, kill, and pillage. Matthew looked up at the arsonist on the ground. He still had the same horrified expression on his face when he died. The knife marks on his shoulder and the hole in his chest made the corpse look even more terrifying. On the surface of the corpse, the dark red spots were still spreading tirelessly. It was the rotten spore that Matthew had previously scattered into the air. After these spores were inhaled by people, it would rapidly form an extremely itchy sac of decay on the surface of the human body. The sac of decay was a creature from the negative plane. It could replenish negative energy for necromancers in battle. Matthew currently has the ability Rotten Sac Mastery. When the level was high, he could also detonate the sac of decay, control the sac of decay, and control the infected through the sac of decay. This was the terrifying aspect of necromancers. Heist's toughness and immunity were ridiculously high. His followers had long since succumbed to the infection, but the sacs only appeared on Heist's body after his death. Crackle. The sacs on Heist's body popped like fireworks. Low crisp sounds rose and fell. Matthew immediately stopped reading the secret letter. We have to deal with it first, or it will be too ugly. He took out a dark green bottle from his magical bag. Puff. The cork was pulled out. A group of butterflies that were flickering with green light flew out. They flew around Matthew a few times. Then, they impatiently stopped on Heist and the other corpses. As the green light moved across the surface of the corpse, the dark red marks were mostly gone. This was the phantom butterfly, a creature from the negative energy plane. The phantom butterfly fed on the sac of decay and its spores, making it a good scavenger. Matthew rarely used the sac of decay. Every time he used it, he would definitely use the phantom butterfly to clean up the surrounding environment. This had nothing to do with the system. It was purely his own little obsession with cleanliness. If the rotten spores were allowed to spread, the environment there would soon become similar to the negative energy plane. This was the reason why most necromancers lived in terrible environments. They were not as particular as Matthew. The phantom butterfly only fed on the sac of decay. Once there was insufficient food, it would quickly die. Matthew followed the philosophy of go big or go home. He didn't stop until the fluorescent lights all over the mountain were so green that they were dazzling. Next was the disposal of the bodies of the arsonists. This was Matthew's first time coming into contact with such a complete and fresh corpse. He was still a little nervous when dealing with it. The followers of the 5 arsonists. Except for the one who was smashed into meat paste by Peggy at the beginning. The other 4 could be summoned as zombies. Their physiques were not bad. Scarface even had a chance to become an elite zombie. Matthew used corpse oil and secret water of negative plane to simply embalm their bodies. After that, he ordered the skeleton soldiers to drag the others into his secret cave. Zombies were far more powerful than skeletons. Correspondingly, the process of summoning zombies was much more troublesome than summoning skeletons. He needed to think about it carefully. The corpse of Heist the arsonist was an excellent material. In Bayan City, the corpse of such a third-rank adventurer would definitely be sold at a high price by the necromancers. This was because it was the best material to make a high-level undead summon, the Dark Knight. Matthew did not have the ability to make Dark Knights yet. This was after level 12. And he had not even advanced to that level yet. It was still far away. For now. The options in front of Matthew were as follows. First, store the corpse and take it out when he had the ability to make Dark Knights. Second, transport it to Bayon City and sell it at a high price. Third, turn Heis into a zombie and nurture it into a zombie king. Fourth, bury him in the oak forest to see if there were any gifts of nature. Let's eliminate the second and third first. Matthew's eyes flickered. He did not lack money. Moreover, it was too wasteful to use a tier 3 corpse as a zombie. It was not easy to nurture a zombie king, and there was a 99% chance that it would be a loss. And between Dark Knight and Gift of Nature, Matthew hesitated for a moment. In the end, he still chose the fourth option. He wasn't coveting Heis' ability. More than that, he wanted to explore the mechanism of nature's gift. If it really doesn't work out, I can dig the body out again. Granted, that will reduce the integrity of the corpse, and the combat power of the Dark Knight will be greatly reduced. Once he made his decision, Matthew no longer hesitated. He found a good place in the oak forest to bury Heis' body. At the same time, he dealt with the victims at the farm. The skeleton soldiers had average fighting abilities, but they were good at manual labor. He found a piece of barren land to the north of the farm and buried everyone. Only then did Matthew have the free time to read the secret letter. A few minutes later, Matthew's expression changed slightly. To like-minded people, the heavenly change was a foregone conclusion. Yurkis had awakened and was watching everyone on this continent. In time, his great power would make the hearts of the world tremble. The structure of the world is changing. In the near future, the heavenly fire and seawater will pour into the inland, and every piece of land we are familiar with will become an endless purgatory. I have received reliable news that the southern guardian Ronin is trapped in the astral plane. The eastern guardian and the evil dragon in the sea have both suffered heavy losses. The western guardian disappeared many years ago, and the northern guardian has never crossed the heavenly chasm mountains. Witherer, evil art master, inheritor of the path of the undead, avenger, red letter hunter, voodoo descendant, arsonist, conspirer, don't be afraid anymore. This is the time for us to rise up and walk the dark path. We have established a stronghold in the secret area northeast of Rolling Stone Town, and we welcome every brother and sister who has been summoned to come and join us in this great event. Written by Fine, Southern Shepherd of the Order of Calamity. The above was the content of the secret letter. There were also many provocative words in the letter. The general idea was to encourage all kinds of evil adventurers to come out and cause trouble. It was as if there would be no chance if they did not cause trouble then. Matthew was not interested in these things. What he cared about was the person in the letter claimed to have established a stronghold north of Rolling Stone Town. He was going to hold a blood sacrifice to please the Void Ruler, Yurkis. And after this blood sacrifice, he would obtain supreme power and could easily flatten Rolling Stone Town. He would also attract the heavenly fire and burn everything. Burn everything. Matthew frowned deeply. This heretic cult believer called Fine was more or less reckless. The truth was clear. Bloody robes in the karst cave. Sif. Suki's kidnapping. The arrival of the arsonist. The intercepted merchant. All of this pointed to Fine and the Order of Calamity. Matthew looked at the mission panel. As expected. After he finished reading the secret letter, the mission changed. Follow-up mission 2 maintaining is also important. Description: a new forest is easily destroyed by an accident. Please protect your forest well. Progress Update 1: you have killed the arsonist Heis and his subordinates, preventing the fire from spreading to the forest in time. You have received the reward Wilderness Transformation. Progress Update 2: you realize that the arrival of Fine and the Church of Calamity will not only pose a great threat to the security of Rolling Stone Town but will also endanger the forest that you have painstakingly planted. You can't stand the threat that's so close to you. Please destroy them as soon as possible. Quest target: Fine, level 12 Warlock and his companions. Mission reward: spell rapid growth and the entrance ticket to the Moonlight Society. Matthew was delighted. This was also the druid's signature spell. The green growth liquid he used to plant trees was the potion version of this spell. Its effect was lowered since the spell had been modified into a potion form. If he could master this spell, his ability to plant trees would be comparable to a real druid. Shapeshifting and rapid growth are the signature skills of druids. It seems that the rewards for the quest maintaining is also very important are all druid abilities. No, perhaps it has nothing to do with the mission but with my means of completing it. Whether it's dealing with the arsonists or the Order of Calamity, I have killed. In that case, is the system working in reward? The reward given for planting trees was the bone dragon of the necromancy element. But the reward for killing and fighting was related to druidism. Matthew pondered with interest. There were not many samples at the moment, so it was not enough to make a conclusion. But this did not stop him from making a bold assumption. He glanced at the bottom of the mission panel. The Tai Chi symbol had a new change. The green dots on the left had already exceeded 2/3. It was not far from being fully charged. He just didn't know what would happen if it was full. On the other side, the gray light spots were still very faint. However, it was much better than before. Matthew had sharp eyes. He could see that the gray speck of light at the bottom was trying its best to surge upward. Whoosh! The dot of light rushed to the 1/3 position. The heart of nature and the path of the undead. Matthew guessed. The rapid increase of the gray light spot should be related to the battle tonight. The operating mechanism behind it still needed to be explored. But not now. Near the farm. Some people had already discovered the disaster there. More and more people came from the town and the countryside. Matthew led the team back to the oak forest. He sent the skeletons back to the cave. Then, he said to Peggy, "I'll have to trouble you to walk back by yourself." Peggy exclaimed, "It's so dark, and you want me to walk alone at night? I'll be afraid." Matthew coughed. "Then I'll summon the skeletons to keep you company." Peggy said hatefully, "You don't give me overtime pay and want me to walk home by myself. Necromancers like you really have zero consciences." Matthew shrugged. "I'm not that capable of teleporting you back. You have to understand me, Peggy." Peggy's heart softened a little. All right, I'll go back alone. But next time I work overtime, you have to give me at least one soul crystal. When we signed the contract back then, you said as much." After sending off the talkative Tauren skeleton, Matthew looked to the north. The merchant's ghost had mentioned the chaos in the ghost castle. Combining that with the contents of the secret letter. Even if the stronghold of the Order of Calamity was not within the ghost castle, it should be nearby. Time was tight. Matthew planned to eliminate the threat as soon as possible. Thus, he leapt. Whoosh! A raven flew over the branches under the moonlight. It headed northeast. The divination results are out. The enemy's location has been confirmed. They are in a valley near the ghost castle. In the main hall, a middle-aged man with a thin face, fully armed, was calmly patrolling the surroundings. Some of the people present were stung by his burning gaze and unnaturally looked away. There were also some people who raised their heads excitedly to welcome the other party's gaze. They yearned for a chance to gain the recognition of the Lord of the Suki family. Blake and Anne, each of you take a team and surround them from the southwest. You have to be fast and be careful of ambushes. Mr. Zeller, please continue to contact the advanced wizards of Bayan City or Stormflow City. If there is anyone who is willing to help, agree to any conditions. Just as I expected, our enemies are not bandits who are blinded by money. They are a bunch of lunatics, scum, and cultists. As I said before, the Suki family will never compromise with such evil scum. Your mission is to kill every villain you see. That's all." In the quiet hall, the Lord's voice was loud and clear. A series of strict and unyielding orders were issued. Those who received the specific mission were all delighted. But gradually, there were also people who looked puzzled. "Sir, will our radical actions agitate the other party? After all, Miss Sif is indeed in their hands." An exceptionally handsome young man wearing a magic robe spoke. This also echoed the doubts of the other people present. The Suki clan was indeed famous for its tough attitude toward its enemies. However, the problem now was, young Miss was in the hands of those villains. If they followed the Lord's method, Sif's survival rate would be so low. Everyone stared at the Lord in confusion. The latter said coldly, "It's because they have Sif that we're doing this." He did not explain too much. Instead, he said to the handsome man, "Mr. Zeller, in addition to contacting the advanced mages, please pay attention to the clues we found before. Sif couldn't have been kidnapped out of thin air. You should understand what I mean." Zeller nodded solemnly. "Everyone, please take action. Use your fastest speed and your strongest strength." The Lord waved his hand. The people in the main hall gradually dispersed. In the end, only the Lord was left alone. He strolled to a window. Not long after, An owl flew in. To be honest, I don't understand the men of the Suki family very well. You're clearly worried about your daughter, but you still make decisions that might harm her. The owl asked in confusion. The Suki family's lord took a deep breath. In front of everyone, I will always be the head of the Suki family and nothing else. Every word I say represents my family. The Suki family would never compromise with evil. This is our motto. The owl was even more confused. Then why did you call me over? The lord said, I know you can transform into a giant eagle. The owl nodded. Yes. Take me to the ghost castle, and the favor you owe me back then will be written off. The lord said decisively. The owl thought for a moment. He nodded and said, sure. But it seems that the patriarch of the Suki family wouldn't take this risk. The lord tightened his grip on the sword at his waist. At this time, I'm also Sif's father. An hour later, the raven flew over the barren mountains under the moonlight. Occasionally, a ghostly wail could be heard from afar. The ghost castle stood at the highest point of the barren mountain. The fog around it never dissipated. Even if the moon hung high in the sky tonight, Matthew could only vaguely see the outline of the castle. He stared at the mountain fog. He had a bad feeling. It was as if there was a pair of eerie eyes staring at him in the fog. It said that before the castle was abandoned, it was the former residence of a hero of the human kingdom. It was once prosperous and noisy, but after a strange disaster, a large number of people living in the castle died. The survivors fled in a hurry, and no one could tell what happened. Later on, it wasn't that no one explored it, but the adventurers who dared to barge into the castle didn't manage to come out in the end. It was as if they were swallowed by the fog. The last time someone explored the castle, it was a famous necromancer in Bayan City. He got the news from somewhere and publicly declared that the secret to immortality was hidden in the castle. He insisted on entering it. The necromancer was no exception. When he was exploring the castle, he had a fierce battle with a group of demons from the lower world, the old Unababas, outside the gate. Therefore, the castle was also called the Unababas Castle. He recalled the conversation he had with Blake. Matthew suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. His perception told him this castle was not something that he could explore at his current level. Fortunately, his destination tonight wasn't Ghost Castle. He avoided the strange fog. The raven leaned to the west. After a while, in the middle of the mountain range ahead of them, there were sporadic sparks of fire. It was a dangerous valley. There were guards at the entrance of the valley. However, the guards' attitude seemed to be more relaxed. Matthew naturally lowered his altitude. He glanced at the mission panel. Mission progress has been updated. You have discovered the evil priest's camp. Matthew didn't rush in. The mission target was an evil priest. This class usually had an extremely high perception. A sudden appearance of a raven could easily alert the enemy. He flew a circle around the valley entrance and skillfully stopped in the bushes beside the mountain path. There was a battle here. Perhaps even more than one. The mountain path was filled with corpses. There were humans. There were also smaller humanoid creatures. It was a lizard monster. Matthew made a judgment based on his knowledge. The wilderness is so convenient. For a necromancer, an ownerless corpse is a gift from nature. He decisively transformed back into his human form and began to summon skeletons. The incantation and Matthew's magic power injected a mysterious color into the messy pile of corpses under the moonlight. One by one, the skeletons stood up from the blood. Their condition was very ordinary. The soul fire in their brains was sometimes bright and sometimes dark, and the bones on their bodies were in a mess. Some of them were even a mixture of lizard monsters and humans, looking very strange and terrifying. This was the lowest level cannon fodder skeleton. They were nothing compared to the elites Matthew had hidden in the cellar. But it was enough to scare the layman. The magic wave of the undead summoning spell quickly attracted the attention of the camp. A fat man who was more than 2 meters tall moved over, surrounded by a group of minions. He was wearing heavy armor. Behind him, 2 teams of people were holding a huge battle axe and a mace for him. Hey! Necromancer! What are you doing? Fatty looked at Matthew with fear. Matthew was still summoning skeletons. Don't you have eyes? I'm giving these souls a new life. Fatty said angrily, they are my people. Even if they die, they are still my corpses. Matthew said arrogantly, not anymore. Bang! Fatty stomped his feet in anger. The already loose mountain path began to shake. Do you want to be my enemy? Matthew looked at him with a faint smile. Your body's grease can be used to refine a lot of corpse oil, but I won't consider making you my slave because your bones must have been worn out in order to support your body when you are alive. Kill him. Fatty was about to make a move. A dignified voice suddenly came from the camp, enough. Fatty was so angry that his entire body was trembling. Fine, let me kill him. How dare he mock my figure? No one dares to do that. However, the minions around him quickly dispersed. A man in a silver robe appeared in front of Matthew. He looked to be about 30 years old. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. He looked decent and had the temperament of a decent person. Tell us why you're here, necromancer. Otherwise, don't blame us for taking action. Fine looked down at Matthew. Are you fine? Matthew was also scrutinizing him. I killed an arsonist and found this. I'm interested in the business you mentioned, so I came here. He threw the secret letter over. Fine glanced at the letter. He suddenly laughed. You killed my friend and still dare to come looking for me. His originally dignified and upright face also became a little demonic because of this smile. If you would call that trash your friend, then I would be very disappointed, Matthew said rudely. Fine laughed. He used to be, but not anymore. You killed him, so you replaced him to become a part of our cause. Come in first, my friend. As long as you're interested in the great cause of the Order of Calamity, we'll definitely get along well. Bone Dragon. I already had it. Thanks to the good image of the necromancer and Matthew's superb acting skills, he had successfully entered the evil priest's camp. However, he did not let his guard down. From beginning to end. He didn't even walk past Fine or the fat man. He hid in the middle of the skeleton soldiers. He followed behind them all the way. The fatty named Angela was getting more and more disgusted by Matthew. Fine didn't say much about it. On the contrary, this was how a lone necromancer should behave. Evil, mean, cunning, cautious. It was obvious that he was not to be trifled with. The valley entrance was very narrow. However, the camp was surprisingly spacious. Matthew found some scattered pottery and utensils inside. These things were obviously not made by humans. This used to be the lair of a group of lizard monsters. He seemed to have seen the doubt in Matthew's eyes. Fine explained with a warm smile, I wanted to invite them to join our cause, but their shamans didn't appreciate it, so I had to kill them all. Matthew lowered his voice. It's fine. They still contributed their strength. Fine looked at the short skeletons among the skeleton soldiers. His eyes revealed a hint of praise. That's true. I've long wanted to find a necromancer to join us, but unfortunately, the necromancers in Bayan City have their hands and feet sealed by chains. They're too gentle, like wolf cubs raised in sheep pens all year round. Even if someone takes off the chains for them, they'll only be a whimpering dog. Fane's words were probing. This cunning priest obviously did not let down his guard against Matthew. Matthew replied disdainfully, the chain of desire cannot suppress the necromancer's pursuit of the truth. You only saw the surface of Bayan City. Fine smiled meaningfully. Perhaps. It seems that you know Bayan City better than me. Matthew pretended to snort. He did not continue to dwell on this topic but chose to take the initiative. Who is your sect leader? As soon as he finished speaking, the fat man, Angela, was furious. You're offending the dignity of our Lord. Matthew did not give in. As far as I know, there are a lot of scammers in the outer plains. Their strength is pitifully weak, but they pretend to be omnipotent. Do you understand what I mean? Fine. You're not the first evil priest I know. Evil priests. As its name suggested, this was a relatively evil class or profession. The power of the evil priests usually came from the sect master they served. Most of these sect masters were not from this plane, but they were abnormally powerful outer layer life forms. They could be fairies from the arcane wilderness, great evil spirits from the lower planes, creations of dusk whose bodies were buried in the astral plane, or divine sin sealed under the bridge of all life. The strength of an evil priest depended on how much power their sect master could project into the plane and how much the sect master cared for the former. Usually, the sect masters would not let their disciples be too weak. However, there were some exceptions. It was just as Matthew had said. The quality of the creatures in the outer plane was mixed, and it was inevitable that there would be a few people who were mixed in. Some evil priests were deceived by the outer layer creatures and did not gain much power, but they paid a huge price. Such examples were not rare. You do have some knowledge. Fine was still not angry. He chuckled and said, It's not convenient for me to tell you the name of my Lord for the time being, but as long as you join my church, you will have the answer to everything you want to know. Inconvenient to reveal. Then he could eliminate the void ruler Yurkus mentioned in the secret letter. Sometimes, evil priests did not do things to please their sect master. Instead, they would try to please the people their sect master wanted to please. This means that the sect master behind him won't be too high in status. Matthew thought quickly. He still maintained his sharp and mean attitude on the outside. He looked around. Your church. With all due respect, these people don't look like they can do anything. They don't seem to have any faith in the church. There were about 40 to 50 people inside and outside the camp. This was not a small scale for an evil priest team. However, Matthew noticed that these people did not seem to be fanatical cultists. They looked listless. Fine blinked. They are just some helpers that I found in a hurry. Some of them are exiled prisoners that I bought from Black Lake Port, and the other is a bandit group that I have incorporated. It's reasonable for you to look down on them, but in the path of completing our career, we will always need some such menial characters. Matthew snorted, and his disdain became more and more obvious. You better show some sincerity and not waste my time here. All right. Fine shrugged helplessly. I'll bring you to meet someone. I'm preparing to hold a ceremony recently, and she's the most crucial part. Deep in the valley. In a tall tent. Matthew saw Sif. It was a young girl with brown-red hair and a pretty face. Her skin was very clean, and only 1 or 2 faint freckles on the left side of her nose gave her a delicate and mischievous feeling. She was now wrapped in a thick blanket. She looked unconscious. Who is this girl? Matthew asked knowingly. The only daughter of the Suki family. Fine raised his head proudly. You should know what kind of bloodline flows in her body. As long as the ritual is successful, we can attract the heavenly fire to destroy everything. Matthew didn't say anything. He really didn't know what was so special about the bloodline of the Suki family. He tried to beat around the bush. How did you catch her? Fine didn't get carried away. This is something you will only know after you join the church. How is it? Sir, I've already shown enough sincerity, but you haven't even told me your name. Matthew said casually, you can call me Raga. If I join you, what can I get? Fine nodded. So, Mr. Raga. Our mission is to awaken the calamity through a great ritual. Every time we succeed, the Lord will bestow rewards and secret treasures. As long as you join us, you will also receive a share of these blessings. After you break through to the 4th level, my Lord might bestow you with a bone dragon. Bone dragon? I already have one. Matthew thought to himself that this evil priest was even better than him at making up stories. But on the surface, he still looked tempted. Then what do I need to do? Fane's eyes flickered. A small test. Since you were able to kill Heiss, you must have mastered the Death Curtain, right? Death Curtain. Necromancer level 12 spell. The effect was equivalent to a small, weakened version of the undead calamity. Where the Death Curtain covers the place, all living beings would be quickly drained of their life force. Then, one by one, they turned into dead spirits. I do. Matthew frowned. However, the effect of this spell is not good. Even a disabled person has the opportunity to escape the range of the Death Curtain by relying on their will to escape. This was also the awkward part of the Death Curtain. It sounded very powerful on paper. However, compared to the undead calamity, which had instant death, the Death Curtain's killing efficiency was so low that the victims could easily escape. Even necromancers who wanted to kill the innocent would not learn this spell. What if they stand still and let you kill them? Said Fine with a smile. Matthew's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately nodded. Of course, that would change everything. Very good. Fine opened the tent door and motioned for the two to leave. They arrived outside the camp. He shouted. Angela. Call everyone over. Then, he looked at Matthew and whispered. Prepare the spell. Matthew refuted, are you crazy? Casting a spell in front of so many people, they will tear me apart. No, believe me, they won't. Fine said firmly. You did something to them, Matthew was puzzled. But why did you do it? Although these people are useless, they must have cost you a lot of money, right? Mr. Raga, you have too many questions. For the first time, Fine showed a hint of dissatisfaction. As they spoke, everyone gathered around, including the two guards who were guarding Sif's tent. Fine suddenly let out a sharp shriek. 15 seconds later, these people all covered their heads in pain. Then, they knelt on the ground one after another. At the same time, flagella-like threads began to emerge from their skin. These gray threads floated in the air. It emitted a strong evil aura. Insight, the priest Fine used curse. Let's begin, Mr. Raga. Fine gave Matthew an unfriendly look. Angela. Bring that girl and prepare my carriage. He called out again. Matthew looked around. He noticed that other than the big tent where Sif was imprisoned, there were many other small tents in the valley. These small tents were not used for living. There seems to be something hidden inside. Insight, you have sensed a strong curse aura. This is part of a curse creation. Curse creation. Death curtain. Matthew was enlightened. He wanted to create a batch of true evil spirits here. Evil spirit was different from the undead that was purely filled with negative energy. Evil spirits that were layered with the elements of the curse were even more terrifying and evil. Are you guys leaving? Matthew took out his staff and looked at Fine. Yes. Before you came, I received a secret message that the Suki family reacted faster than I expected. Unfortunately, I have to postpone the ceremony and abandon this stronghold. Fine explained coldly, their people are on their way here, and I naturally have to prepare some surprises for them. If you don't make a move, then these curse creations will only add a little trouble to the underlings. However, if we could create a real evil spirit in the material world, not only would the spirit be able to make the Suki family suffer a huge loss, you might even be able to please his lord. Mr. Raga, out of politeness and respect, I've already told you everything that I shouldn't have said. Now, please don't disappoint me. As he spoke, his right hand gripped the sword. His left hand was holding a spellbook with an evil wolf head engraved on it. I understand. Matthew smiled lightly and raised his withered wooden staff. A low incantation sounded. Fine retreated to what he thought was a safe distance. He looked at Matthew warily. Until that moment, a strong sense of danger surged into his heart. I forgot to tell you that although I am a necromancer, I am actually a good person. Matthew smiled. In addition, I already have a bone dragon. As soon as he finished speaking, the soundless roar took away all the sounds in the valley. In the distorted air, a gigantic creature covered in bones descended from the sky. Fine and Angela tried to escape. Unfortunately, they could not do it. A domineering aura spread out like a stone thrown into a compound. Your summoned creature has used the ability Draconic Prestige. Evil Priest Fine and Evil Warrior Angela were stunned, weakened, and scared. Duration, 12 seconds. Like and subscribe.